What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be doing another mock draft. We do have a bit of change in this draft order with some big games going on last week. We saw the Giants and the Patriots take each other on, and obviously that had some big draft implications for both of those teams. Both of those teams looking for a quarterback in this draft potentially. We'll see what happens. So with that being said, Chicago still the first team on the board here. And this is an interesting spot because do you still believe in Justin Fields? I think after the performance on Monday Night Football between him and Joshua Dobbs, it was just hard to watch. This team overall isn't really that terrible. There is some bright spots, and I do think that you should take Caleb Williams in the draft here. I think a team could potentially trade up if they don't want that option, but I think that Chicago, in this sense, needs to take a quarterback right now. There's just too many bad plays that we've seen from a guy like Justin Fields, and maybe you can get some good value out of Justin Fields. Maybe if a team still believes in him, you can get some picks, but for now I think you got to go with Caleb Williams if you're in this spot. Maybe another team can move up, like I said, but no trades in this mock draft right now. I think we just got to go with based off what we have. And in the second spot, the Cardinals, I think they still believe in Kyler Murray. He's shown some flashes. I still think, when he plays, he could be a top 10, maybe even a top 5 quarterback at some points. So I think they're still fine with keeping him as the quarterback. So you might as well pair him up with one of the best wide receiver prospects of all time in Marvin Harrison. Pretty routine picks to start off here. Then the Patriots third here. I think they're happy with their loss against the Giants. Whoever lost this would probably be around the third pick right now. And the Patriots, Mac Jones needs to go. He and Zach Wilson, the only two quarterbacks with at least 300 attempts this year with more interceptions than touchdowns. I think Drake May fits this team pretty good. He's a pocket passer, and with what we've seen from Bill Belichick succeeded with Tom Brady. Drake May's not, I'm not saying he's the next Tom Brady, but maybe a similar-ish mold. Drake May a little more agile, but Drake May can make the throws that you need him to. And in the third pick, I think you feel comfortable there. Chicago back here now on the clock. You have a few different options here. With your first overall pick, you got Caleb Williams. So now, do you want someone to maybe protect him? Do you want someone maybe for him to throw the ball to? There's a lot of different options here, and it is kind of tough because we did see Marvin Harrison go with the second pick overall, and you may say maybe there's not another wide receiver that should go in this spot this high. I could agree with you here necessarily. There is a lot of options for the Bears to go with because also, like I said, you could go on the defensive end. There's a lot of different areas. And I do think if Chicago keeps the number 1 pick, maybe they trade this pick too. I'm not really sure. But for now, I think with how bad this team is, as you guys see, the needs are all across the board. I do kind of feel like it's a little bit out there to maybe give them a wide receiver in this 4 spot. I'm not sure if a guy has really come up, but I am going to give them the benefit of the doubt here. I am going to just give them a wide receiver to go with Caleb Williams, maybe get him and DJ Moore out there. Pretty good team. So as of right now, I think Rome Odunze is my second wide receiver. I know a lot of people really like Malik Neighbors. He's been great, but Rome Odunze is 6'3", 215, a very fast guy. I think once we see him test out, he may be able to move up these draft boards. He is a guy that we could see run very fast in the draft. I know it's been reported maybe around that 4.4, maybe even less than that, maybe even 4.3. I'm not really sure. But he's a big frame guy. He's been fantastic. I think he's my second wide receiver in the draft so far as of right now. We're still very early, but Washington here in the 5th spot. I think they do need help on the outside offensively. I think between guys like Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu, I think Fashanu has kind of cemented himself as that number 1 tackle in the draft as of right now, but I think Joe Alt is very close. I think both of those guys, I wouldn't say 1A and 1B because I don't really like doing that, but pretty close to that. I think definitely very close 1 and 2. Everyone else after these two guys, I think, is a little bit lower of a tier. I think these guys are both in the S tier of this draft, but great tackles. I think they're going to take Olu here. Keep him within the local-ish area, Penn State, Washington. A little bit close But next up, my favorite team, the Giants here, you have a lot of different options to go. Both of the quarterbacks off the board. I still think that's fine. I think potentially if you still believe in Daniel Jones, you can get a guy maybe in the second round of this draft, like we'll see later. Maybe a guy like Jaden Daniels, maybe a guy like JJ McCarthy. We'll have to see how this board falls. But next, with this 6th overall pick, I think the Giants need to get a receiver, and Malik Nabers is still there. I think they would take either one, Malik Nabers or Rome Odunze, in the 6th pick would be great for them. And next up here, we have the Bucs at 7. Now, this is a spot where, some people have maybe mocked a quarterback here. I think it's a little early for anyone else in this draft to go. Personally, I'm not a huge believer in the rest of the guys as of right now. A lot can still change if we see a guy like Bo Nix maybe go all the way, win a national championship this year. That helps bring his draft stock up. But I think as of right now, if you're the Bucs, just go best player available, which is Brock Bowers. And I know tight end at the 7th pick, that's a little high, but I think Brock Bowers has every single skill in his arsenal to become one of the best, if not the best, tight ends of all time. This guy is amazing. I know some teams probably hesitant to take a guy after what we saw with Kyle Pitts go for. I think Brock Bowers is a way better prospect than him, which Kyle Pitts, one of the best tight end prospects ever, but Brock Bowers is incredible as a running back, as a receiver, as a tight end, and you can do pretty much anything with him. And next we have the Jets here. Another interesting spot, potentially needing a quarterback. It says on here, I think Aaron Rodgers will come back. Under that impression, I think you got to get a guy to guard for him. Joe Alt, the second best tackle in this class, is still on the board. You feel comfortable taking him with the 8th pick there. I think that's pretty good range for him. Joe Alt, top 10 pick, maybe even a top 5, depending on what we see from this board if there's teams that need tackles, but a very good player in this draft. Next up, the Chargers. Probably going to have a new quarterback next year. There's been a lot of struggles there the past few years. We've seen Justin Herbert have some great games and the rest of the team just not really do much with that. But now I think you should go out there. I know pretty much all of the needs on the board here, from running back to wide receiver, tight end, D-line, linebacker. I think you got to take the first defensive player off the board here. I think there is a lot of good wide receivers. You do need wide receivers, and we can look at who's left here. Keon Coleman, Emeka Egbuka, Donnie Mitchell, Xavier Leggetti, Xavier Worthy, Johnny Wilson, all these guys, Jalen Polk, all these guys could rise up, but I don't see any of these guys being another top 10 guy. I think Keon Coleman and Emeka Egbuka, maybe even A.D. Mitchell, who I'm a big fan of, I don't see them going in the top 10 at this point. So I do think that you should go with a defensive player, and I think the best defensive player right now, in my opinion, is Jared Verse. I know a lot of people think that Dallas Turner is better. I think Jared Verse may be the better prospect. I know Dallas Turner has a lot more production this season, and that's kind of why Jared Verse has fallen down on some people's boards, and I completely understand, but I think as of right now, I still believe in Jared Verse a little bit more. Some things could change depending on what we see with these next bowl games and the playoffs and everything, but as of right now, Jared Verse is my number 1 player on the defensive end. Obviously, there's guys like Latu, but having to retire from football, as we know, definitely puts a little bit of damper on your draft stock just because we don't really know what we're going to see. Maybe we'll get a little bit more clarity in the testing. A guy like Jalen Phillips, who also had that same issue, has gone on and played very well in the NFL, so still could be able to get past that. Next up, though, we have the Titans here with the 10th overall pick. They do have a bunch of different needs, and I know this is a little bit of a hot take at this point, but they do need a defensive back. I'm going to give them, in my opinion, the best defensive back in this class in Cooper DeJean. He is an all-around athlete on the defense. Cornerback, safety, kick returner, punt returner, whatever you need him to do, this guy has been fantastic. Cooper DeJean has flown up a lot of people's boards, and I think that it's pretty close between him and Kool-Aid McKinstry. I do want to see a little bit more from both, but as of right now, we'll throw a dog a bone. We'll throw Cooper DeJean in the top 10. I think he's been fantastic so far, and that all the tape looking at him, I know he's hurt, but I think he should be fine in the long-term regards. This may put a little bit of damper on his draft stock, but I think he'll end up being fine. And if he is, assuming that he's fully healthy by the time the draft comes around, I think he is the best defensive back in this draft. Next up, the Raiders. in a very interesting spot here, because last year they were in this same spot, a little higher up last year. Would they take Will Levis with that top 10 pick? They maybe needed a quarterback, but they decided not to. We saw Will Levis drop all the way to the second round. I think we could end up seeing something like that happen this year. We have the top 2 quarterbacks. There's some talk about maybe other guys going in the first round, but we may see some of those guys just drop because a lot of teams aren't confident. We still don't really know. Like I said, it's November. The draft isn't until April. We really don't even understand what teams are thinking until like February or March. We got to wait until after the Super Bowl and free agency and everything. So the Raiders here with the 11th overall pick. Interesting spot. I am going to give them Jahan Newton here. I think one of the best defensive players in this draft too. They need some help on that D line, like it says here. They need some help pretty much everywhere on that defensive area. Linebackers, they've been fine. Spillane has actually played very good this year, so I'm going to go with the defensive line there with Jahan Newton. Johnny Newton, I think he's a great player. He's definitely risen up a lot of people's draft boards these past few months. And next up here for the Saints, they need some help on the offensive and defensive line here. So when we're looking through, there's a bunch of guys that you could go with here. Dallas Turner, a little bit more of an edge. It seems like the Saints maybe need a little bit more help on the interior. I am going to give them the next best tackle in this class, Fuanga from Oregon State. He's been great. He has definitely risen up a lot of people's draft boards. Fuaga has been great this year for Oregon State. Oregon State having a very good season. DJ Uiagalelei has been all right. He's been shaky throughout the weeks. I know a lot of people not very happy with him since he left Clemson. He was supposed to be this top-end guy there, but he really wasn't. But I think he's risen up the boards, and that's definitely helped him a lot. He's going to be a top 12 pick in this draft now, where before this season, I don't even think I had him in the first or the second round. Definitely wasn't even in my top 25 players, but that's definitely helped him, risen up a lot of boards here. And next up here with the Packers with the 12th overall pick, they need a lot of help too. I think you could go a bunch of different directions here. They need some help on the defensive line. I do think if you're looking at this board, though, you can't let Dallas Turner slip further. I think that he is pretty close to Jared Verse, and I know they may not necessarily need help on the edge right away. I think it's an instance where you can get the best player in the draft. You can't really let him slip further than the 13th overall pick there if you were the Packers, because I'm sure the Rams would love to have a guy like him. And with that being said, a guy kind of like him at that edge position, I think the Rams would be willing to take a risk on a guy like Latu here. As we know, he's definitely had some troubles with the injuries, having to retire and everything. But as long as he can come back and be healthy, I think his draft stock could rise up. But I think the Rams would definitely be willing to take a risk there. They need some help on that defense, and I think he would help them out tremendously. Next up here, the Bengals. They also need some help on that defensive line. They also need some help on the offensive line. They've tried to go out and get a few players in the past few years. Nothing really has stuck. They've thrown a bunch of things at the board, but I think next up, if we're looking at the next best tackle in this class, tight end, I don't think Jatavion Sanders is going to make it into the first round. See him more of a day 2 guy. But as of right now, I think we got to go with the next best tackle. There's a lot of different options here, depending on who you ask. Maybe Amarius Mims. He's had some injury troubles this year. Graham Barton can play all the positions on the offensive line almost. He's done that for Duke and in high school. Troy Fautanu, he's definitely risen up a lot of people's boards. Even guys like Patrick Paul, Tyler Gutton, both of those guys, I've seen them, people have them within the top 10. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people out there that believe that these guys are the next up at that position. But for me, I do kind of want to stick to my draft board, my overall big board too. I'm going to give them J.C. Latham there, a big guy out of Alabama. I think he would be great on that Bengals offensive line and help Joe Burrow maybe not get killed every single play. Next up here, we have the Bills. There's been a lot of talks about maybe losing a guy like Stefon Diggs throughout these next few years. So I think you could get a guy maybe in a similar regard to Stefon Diggs, a lot younger. Get Emeka Egbuka. He's a guy that was very high going into this season. Next to Marvin Harrison, his production hasn't been as high just because he's playing next to the best player in college football, and it's very tough for you to get the amount of stats and build everything up if you're a wide receiver 2 on a team like that. And it's not like Ohio State is the highest scoring offense. They're not really an Oregon or Washington. I know we've seen Washington slow down, but they're not a team like that. They still have scored. Emeka Egbuka has some good plays, but I think he's a guy that people are starting to sleep on a little bit. Still one of the best wide receivers in this class. I think he is maybe a little bit better than Keon Coleman. At least in this instance, I think the Bills would like the fit of Emeka Egbuka on the Bills as of right now with Josh Allen. And next up here with the Cardinals with the 17th pick, we saw them take Marvin Harrison earlier. So I think you want to maybe address the defense now, since you went with an offensive player earlier. Potentially maybe go with that offensive line, maybe another receiver, but I doubt they take 2 receivers in the first round. There's a very deep wide receiver class this year, so I think you can hold off with that a little bit. Maybe go in the defense here. They need some help. Kool-Aid McKinstry has fallen down a lot here with the 17th pick. You need some help in that cornerback position, and he is arguably the best cornerback in this class. I think it's pretty close with him and a guy like we saw earlier go in Cooper DeJean. Cooper DeJean maybe a little bit more of an athlete in my opinion, but Kool-Aid McKinstry maybe the best pure cornerback in this draft. Next up here, we have the Broncos with the 18th overall pick. They need some help in a few different places. They do need some help on that edge. I'm going to make it quick here. Give him Chop Robinson. I think he's been great this year for Penn State. He's had a lot of great games, especially last week against Rutgers. That was a fantastic game, especially for his film. Forced fumble, sack. He had a lot of tackles for losses. He's been great this whole year, and I think in a class where edge is very deep, he may be the 3rd guy coming off of the board here, maybe even the 4th, depending on how you view guys like Dallas Turner, maybe a little bit more of a linebacker, Latu, guy like Jared Verse, but maybe Chop Robinson, maybe the 4th edge off the board, but at the 18th overall pick, I still think he would be happy with that. Next up, the Falcons here. They are in need of a few different positions. Now, this is one of those teams that you could look at maybe potentially getting a quarterback here. They're one of those teams that maybe Desmond Ridder isn't the full-time answer, but with the options left on the board, do you go with an older guy like Bo Nix? Do you go with a guy like Jaden Daniels? Do you go with a guy like Michael Penix? Maybe even a guy like Shedeur Sanders down here. Maybe even a guy like J.J. McCarthy. And in my opinion, as of right now, we don't really know if he's going to enter this draft, but I think if he is draft eligible, the Falcons go with the storyline. They take Shedeur Sanders here, and I know there's a lot of people that have mixed opinions on him, but Shedeur has looked fantastic at Colorado. He has one of the worst, if not the worst, offensive line in all of college football, but he went out and performed. I know he has an injury. I know he may not enter the draft, but assuming that he's healthy, assuming that he's in this draft as of right now in November, if he enters this draft, I think the Falcons should take him. I do think that he has a little bit more high upside than a guy like Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix, since those guys are a little bit older. Shedeur has performed. He performed at Colorado. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the country still, despite them not having the season that they expected. They still exceeded expectations on the season. I know they were ranked earlier in the year, so maybe people thought, oh, they should go on and make the playoffs. I think the people that assumed that they would go and make the playoffs or even a championship game, kind of crazy at that point. This team wasn't really that good, but he did what he needed to. One of the leaders in touchdowns, passing yards. Shedeur did everything, and if you look on the film's even better. Some of the plays that he made is just insane, and I don't even know if some NFL quarterbacks can make those plays. He is a great two-way threat, being able to run and throw the ball. So I think the Falcons would love to build up that storyline once again with another Sanders on this team. Next up here, the Colts. They do need some help in a few different areas. Need some help in the defensive back, D-line, O-line, wide receiver. So the question here is, who is the best player left on the board that you feel like you should draft here? I think if they do need help in that defensive back area, a guy like Nate Wiggins could be great here. I know a lot of people have some different rankings in the cornerback area, but I think Nate Wiggins will be good in the NFL at Clemson. He's been good. I know there's a lot of people that maybe have him a little bit lower on their list. Maybe some people like other guys in that cornerback area. I know there's a lot of options to choose from. Kalen King, Josh Newton, even Kamari Lassiter, TJ Tampa, Denzel Burke. There's a lot of different options to go with, but I think the Colts feel safe with Nate Wiggins there. Next up here, the Vikings. This is a spot where maybe before I wouldn't say that they would go with a quarterback, but at this point, it's very tough to not go with a quarterback based on what we just saw last night as of this recording. What we saw last night, Monday Night Football with the Vikings, it was just terrible what they saw from Joshua Dobbs. He was good for the first few weeks, and then, reality kicked in. Maybe he's not this star quarterback that they hoped for. And I may be projecting a little bit, but I do think that they should go with a guy who I expect to make the playoffs, who I expect to win the championship game. This is a little bit of a prediction. A guy who has proven himself maybe in a conference that has been very tough this year, the final year of the conference. A guy that I think their team has been great all year. He could go out and potentially even win the Heisman. I'm going to give the Vikings Michael Penix here, and I think he's a great prospect. I know he's a little bit older, but I expect between him and Bo Nix, whoever wins that, whoever goes on to the playoffs, maybe even wins a playoff game, potentially even a championship. I know that's a little bit out there, but whoever performs between those two guys, I think their draft stock will definitely rise. Maybe even who wins the Heisman too. Like we've seen before, a guy like Joe Burrow who came in his senior year, he was still old after that. He went out and performed so well, won the Heisman that you couldn't deny him. I think he was a little bit better of a prospect than these guys. Definitely, he went number one overall in that draft. But I think one of these guys could definitely benefit from winning the Heisman, going to the playoffs, and having their draft stock rise up a bit. And the Vikings needed a quarterback there. Next up here, we have the Seahawks. They're in an interesting spot here because they do need a little bit of help from a few different areas. They need some help on the edge, and we have Braylon Trice here from Washington. I think you keep him within the same area. Going from Washington to Seattle, back-to-back Washington players go off of the board there. And we could even make it a little bit more interesting if we could find Jalen Polk here going to the Steelers, but we're not going to have that there. Not 3 Washington players go in a row, but cool to see back-to-back players there. With the Steelers here, they've definitely exceeded a little bit of expectations this year, in my opinion, so far. In a very tough division, we saw Deshaun Watson go down. The Browns definitely hurting from his injury this year, even though they've been pretty solid. Even a team like Baltimore has been fantastic throughout the whole year, but the Bengals also struggling. But the Steelers here in the 23rd pick, it seems like they're always within this area, maybe that first out in the playoffs. As we know, we haven't seen them have a losing record since Mike Tomlin has been there, so I don't expect them to have a losing record anytime soon here. And they need some help in that linebacker, defensive back area. And I am going to go out a little bit of a hotter take here, I would say. I'm going to give them Kamari Lassiter. I think he could be a great defensive back for them. I have him a little bit higher than some people on their boards, but I think Lassiter has been fantastic at Georgia this year. And I do think with him out there on this Steelers defense, he would fit pretty well with the guy like Joey Porter, who they drafted last year. Even a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick out there. They have a lot of good guys, but they do need some help a little bit with their defensive back, so we'll give him Lassiter there. Next up here, we have the Texans, who have completely exceeded expectations here in a playoff spot already. They've been fantastic going up against the Jaguars this past week, a very close game. And what do you give CJ Stroud? I think you go out and give him Keon Coleman. He needs some help in that wide receiver room. I think those guys together would be fantastic. Keon Coleman has been fantastic this year at Florida State. I know this may be a little bit low on some people's boards. I think he could easily rise up a lot higher than this, but he has fallen. A lot of teams need more help in the defensive area. We've seen some quarterbacks go off the board, but if they could get him with the 24th pick, I think that would be the biggest steal of the draft as of right now. Next up here, the Dolphins with the 25th pick. They need a little bit of help on the offensive end. maybe a little bit more of a guy that could fit a few different roles. A guy like I talked about earlier, Graham Barton, who has played a few different roles throughout his college and high school career. He can move out throughout the line. They need some help on the line, maybe in that offensive guard / tackle area, maybe a little bit of help kicking out like that. I think Graham Barton would be perfect for a team like that who needs a little bit of help there. Next up here, the Cowboys. The Cowboys, every single year, we've seen them go out and get some studs on the defensive end, and I do think that that's definitely helped them a lot. Their offense has been fantastic despite really going with defense heavy in these past few years, and I think as of right now, with the spot that they're in, there's a bunch of different guys that they could go with here, maybe on the offensive, maybe on the defensive end, but I do think that you should go out here, maybe even get another defensive player. They do need some help in that cornerback area. There's a bunch of different guys you could go with here. Maybe a guy like Kalen King, Josh Newton, Terrion Arnold, TJ Tampa, Denzel Burke has fallen down a little bit. Maybe even you go with a guy like Cameron Kitchens here, who is more of a safety. Maybe they need a little bit more of a cornerback friendly area. And I think I'll go with Kalen King here. A little bit of a longer, bigger cornerback there for Dallas. With the 27th pick here, we have the Lions. They need some help on their interior offensive line. And it's kind of tough here because I don't really think anyone should go in this first round as of right now in the interior offensive area. So I think we kind of got to go away from that. They do need some help on the defensive line. If we look, we got guys like Leonard Taylor, I think is really the only option left in the first round. Chris Jenkins is good, but I don't know if he's snuck in there. But you could also go to the edge here. JT Tuimoloau has been great. I think that we are going to go back to that cornerback area, and I think a guy like Josh Newton, maybe Terrion Arnold. I'm going to go with TJ Tampa here. He has risen up a lot of people's draft boards. He was great at Iowa State so far this season, and I think he could get in here. Now, the Jaguars here potentially looking for another defensive back here. They need some help on the edge as well. Looking through here, they do need some help on the interior offensive line. I kind of see them going a little bit more towards that defensive back area, and I'm going to give them Cameron Kitchens here. I think he's a fantastic player, but like we've seen in so many drafts recently, teams kind of not willing to go with a traditional safety at this point. Teams are more likely to go with a cornerback or even a safety turned cornerback before they go with a safety. I don't know why. I think it's just the position value isn't as high. It's kind of in that same area as a running back. You really have to be this elite prospect to go in that top 10, top 15 area if you're a safety. Next up here, the Chiefs. I think, like we've talked about before, this is a team that needs some help in the wide receiver area. And if we look at the board here, we have a lot of different options. I'm going to go with who I think is the best receiver left on the board at this point. A.D. Mitchell, fantastic at Georgia, has made some massive catches in his career, even when he was at Georgia. Now at Texas with Quinn Ewers, he had a pretty good season, maybe not statistically the greatest that you would expect transferring, but I think he's still one of the best wide receivers in this class. Next up here, San Francisco. They need some help on the offensive line. I think we're going to go with Amarius Mims here. They do need some help, maybe within that tackle area. As we know, throughout these past few years, the 49ers have always had a fantastic tackle in Trent Williams, but we've seen him get a little bit hurt this year, a little bit banged up. He's 35 to this point, so they're going to need to replace him soon. He's getting to the point where he's still one of the best players in the NFL, but like I said, he's getting banged up. He's getting hurt, so you can't really hold on to him forever. He's not going to be your tackle for the rest of the time that you're a team. Like, this guy's going to be gone within the next few years. I think you have to look forward towards that. Next up with these last two picks, Baltimore is on the board here. They need some help, maybe wide receiver, cornerback, D-line area. I think they're going to take Leonard Taylor here. They need some help in that defensive line. He's been great. Another guy that has risen up a lot of people's boards. And finally here, the Eagles. They need really, they don't really need that much help anywhere. I think you could go with a cornerback here. just because you need some help in that defensive back area. And you've brought a lot of guys in the past few years. Some guys haven't worked out. Some guys have left, like a guy like CJ Gardner-Johnson left. We don't really know how much longer they're going to be able to have guys play on that elite level like Darius Slay. So I think you come in and bring a guy like Terrion Arnold here, and that is going to end the first round of this draft. As you guys can see here, we'll pull it up. A bunch of different guys, and at this point with this draft that we've seen, having a guy like Shedeur Sanders go in this draft, having a guy like Michael Penix, we don't know if Shedeur is going to enter the draft. If he does, I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in this draft. I think personally he's the third best quarterback in this draft, which is pretty high praise in a very good quarterback class, but a lot of the guys are older. Shedeur Sanders has made some fantastic throws, so I think he definitely deserves that. A lot of cornerbacks, a lot of defensive players, even though we saw 1 through 8 be all offensive players, a lot of good wide receivers. Like I've said before, this is one of the best offensive and overall, honestly, one of the best drafts that we could see in NFL history. There is a lot of dogs in this class, and for now, this is what we're going to see with this draft, but we still got a lot of time until the draft actually happens. But for now, get a little bit of a prediction of how I kind of see this draft board. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next mock draft. We'll wait a little bit. We'll see how the next few weeks kind of go with some more draft stock. But if you guys have an idea, maybe a draft without quarterbacks, maybe a draft offensive players only, let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next one.